This is Holding Left Edge with Christian and Simon.
Nice.
Sexual.
We're going.
We are back again.
Should we just get going?
And
Why not?
absolutely. Absolutely.
What I do is I do the introduction, so I say, good evening, welcome to episode 5 of Holding Left Edge, the UK shooting podcast that deals with the spin. I'm Simon. You'll notice there's no Christian. Christian's away sunning himself in Italy. But I'm joined by the enigmatic international shooting guru, that is Rob Ramsden. Good evening, Rob.
Hey, buddy, how you doing?
I'm good, mate. Thank you. I've looked forward to this podcast for a very long time.
Right.
Rob is that person that whenever I have conversations with him, I always go off thinking about other things and stimulates all the grey matter in my brain. For those that don't know you, Rob, do you want to tell us a bit about yourself and your background and how we came to meet? It's probably the easiest way to explain it.
Jesus, how long have I got?
I'm going to keep it to an hour, but I'm sure you can squeeze it
in. I basically shot my first long-range rifle in 2008, I think it was, with the legendary Zach Smith. And if anybody knows who Zach Smith is or doesn't know who Zach Smith is, you guys need to find out who Zach Smith is. He's probably one of the grandfathers of precision rifle shooting sport in the world. I think already back then he'd won a whole lot of Steel's Challenges, Steel Safaris back in the States. That was kind of before the whole PRS thing kicked off. And he's got a great website, great resource called demigodllc.com. So if you haven't checked it out, go check out demigodllc.com. It is there's a pile of great information in there. And he was the guy who really kicked off the whole 6.5 switch. You know, and back then it was the 260 Remington. And he did all the studies behind it and the maths. And he's kind of the guy who got everybody talking about ballistics. You know, back in the old day. And I shot with him. I was lucky enough to go shooting with him in 2008 in Colorado. And then I went back to South Africa, started getting things together, and had a bit of work issues come in the way. You know, work ties up away from sport sometimes, as it does. I was heavily involved at the time in equestrian sport. And I've basically been on, actually, thinking back on it, I think I've been on sports committees for almost 20 years now. It's quite a while. And I ran the first, another buddy of mine, Steve Cox, and I were shooting 3-gun nation. And we both were like, hey man, you got a long range rifle? Yeah, I got a long range rifle. You know, I just bought an Accuracy International and an AW. And I was back in like 2014. And we set up and ran the first precision rifle match in South Africa in 2015, I think it was, somewhere around there. But in 2014, I went over to the States. I actually RO'd one of those matches in the States. It was actually an insane experience, being an RO in one of those big matches. And then went back to South Africa, got the sport going. I think in 2016, I think we ran the very first PRS match outside of America that was actually sanctioned by PRS in the world, which is pretty cool. Yeah. I then ended up building the South African Precision Rifle Federation. And what that involved was taking all the experience that I picked up from equestrian sport. We had a massive big debacle at the London Olympics with equestrian sport that required there was a case where an athlete took the organization, the whole of South African sport, to the Court of Arbitration of Sport and won. And that was an equestrian sport. And they weren't very happy, and the South African sports organizations weren't happy, and they said, right, we need you guys to completely and utterly restructure your sport correctly as per the following framework. This is the framework. This is how you need to learn about sport. You can't just do what the hell you like. There is a framework involved. You need to follow it. If you want to represent athletes overseas and do things properly, you need to follow this framework. And we got a very rude awakening into that whole side of it. And so I took a lot of time off from work and things like that. Actually, I just got absorbed into sports management in a way. And then I built the South African Precision Rifle Federation under the correct structure. I got it accepted by South African Sport Shooting underneath their structure. which kind of meant that any of our competitors competing overseas would then achieve South African colors, actual proper South African colors, not just a team going overseas and representing, but actually wearing a South African jacket, going down. The team would be recorded as being an athlete from South Africa, not just South African shooter, if you know what I mean. It doesn't actually an athlete side of it. I then met up with Tiff Dew and Marcus Olsen, and we got together and we said, right, let's create the World Federation. And so I put together the whole structure for the IPRF. I wrote the rule book, I wrote the constitution, I did everything in the background, built the websites, you name it. If there's any piece of documentation ever written at IPRF, I'm the guy that did it. It was a massive amount of work. But yeah, hugely fun, hugely rewarding. And obviously on the way, met you, but when you were part of GBPRA, and we've got the same ideas in terms of the sport development. I think I think that there are so many things that people don't know yet, and the sport's so new. I mean, I've got a big jump. I mean, like 20 years of experience in sports, in being on committees at all levels, from club level right the way through to national and then international. You tend to pick up on a lot, and kind of start realizing where you have to fit in, where every national organization has to fit in, where every provincial organization has to fit in, where every club inside of that, and then the athlete development progress from basically entering into the sport right the way through to the top of the sport. And it's there's a lot. It's a huge amount of work.
There is a lot. Now, that was just an introduction, and you've gone on to a lot of things we're going to talk about. I mean, for those people out there in podcast land that are listening or watching, I've been in and around the shooting industry in the UK for a long time, and I can safely say, and Rob will forgive me for saying it, it was clear when I first met Rob, and we met probably when the IPRF was just getting set up. I think PRS days. Rob will forgive me for showering him with praise, but Rob struck me straight away. You struck me straight away as being one of the people that got it from a very granular level. Now, what you see when you have new sports coming in is that there's almost a rush in there, like a gold rush, to get things up and running because people want to be participating. And it was interesting to see how much work was going on behind the scenes to get things in place, but the whole time you were shooting as well.
Well, not shooting very well. I would say not shooting very well.
Well, no. I think the point I was building to is the first time we actually met in the flesh was in France, the Worlds in 2022.
Yep, 22, yeah.
That was the first time we actually met, but we'd been conversing through the mediums of the internet for a long time.
Exactly.
To some of the shared views that we had. Now, like what you've said there is that you had an understanding of sports before you got into precision rifle shooting. So you almost had a head start on people that were typically getting involved in the sport because it was a sport, whereas you were an infrastructure-minded man already. So for you were talking a language that I think I saw was lost on an awful lot of people. For the best of intentions, people trying to keep up, but I think it always made me chuckle how many steps ahead you were. Now, for the people out there listening in podcast land, what Rob's just explained there is that things started in America. Everything starts in America. That's how it works. And I'm right in saying PRS as a brand started in America and then found its way overseas. South Africa were, that's me watching the Olympics there and getting Australia and South Africa mixed up with the breakdancing this morning. Right. South Africa were head and shoulders above anyone outside of America. And then there was a rush from the GB to try and almost catch you up. And I think that was probably down to the fact that Tiff was very much involved in what you were doing.
Yeah, let me just preface why that occurred, and there was a very specific reason why it had to occur, right? So PRS is a private company that is owned in America by back when we started. I was working with a guy called Sean Wiseman, and there was like a committee of guys behind him, and then that changed over the years. We ended up working with Shannon Kay for a while. And then it went back to being who was it? Then somebody else bought it after that. Then that all fell apart. They then sold it to Shannon for $1. Shannon then made a whole lot of money out of it. Then he sold on, and anyway, it's a private organization. And the problem with private organizations is that they are not recognized by any national sporting body. So in other words, if we were to carry on being PRS in South Africa, we would never have been allowed to join the national sporting body. They just said to us, no, you guys are, it's a private sport, you can't do it, right? And the sport is so much bigger than PRS. Right? There's grassroots stuff. There's PRS itself as a brand. There's NRL as a brand. There is in the States you'll find a whole lot of things that they call outlaw matches, right? You will have heard of competition dynamics. And that's actually Zach Smith. He runs that, and Zach also owns Thunder Beast Arms Corporation. And all of those they're all part of our sport, right? So what we needed to do internationally was create an umbrella organization for our sport to exist inside of, right? And hence the creation of in South Africa was the South African Precision Rifle Federation. It should have been called association, but there's a bit of a mess up with the South African Sports Confederation. So it's just the way the nomenclature at the time, but it should be an association. And then that would have fallen underneath the International Precision Rifle Federation. And then that would then have all the different brands inside of that, and operating at various levels. I mean, and really, it should be open to anybody to run a match. If you run a match, if you set standards nationally, and a person runs a match, it can be any match. It doesn't have to fall under any other brand. As long as you meet certain standards, you should be able for athletes who compete at that match to get qualifications in competition, right? And that was kind of the premise of the whole thing, was to create that correctly structured framework that falls into national organizations. And the primary goal at the time was to achieve the recognition for our top athletes, our high performance athletes, the guys going worldwide. You want to be, when you compete for your country, you want to know that's for your country. It's not just a couple of guys who are in a bus together saying it's a holiday tour to, we came from the UK. You actually kind of want to be the British team. You want to be, the main thing. Yeah. And that's what we achieved.
And at the time that the South African Precision Rifle Federation was setting up, we set the GBPRA up, I remember it well.
Yep.
And we saw a number of countries come online almost simultaneously with a view to the first Worlds in France, which were looming. Yep. Originally, it was going to be Hungary, wasn't it, I think? And then...
Yep, didn't happen.
And then we ended up in France. And then a number of nations have come on since and grows and grows and grows under that IPRF umbrella. Yep. And the reason I wanted to labour that point in relation to these structures coming up is because I think it's one of the common themes, or one of the common topics that we found ourselves talking about, is maintaining those structures, or building those structures in a way that's sound going forwards, and it not being about the finale. It's all about the foundations that are in place and building for future events and growing the sport, as we say so much.
100%. Yep.
But you and I'd call you a purist, is the best way I could. Probably one of the biggest compliments I give you as well, in that you're very one-dimensional with how you look at things, but you do view things three-dimensionally. And I remember you and I having many a conversation back when you were still. What were you doing then on the IPRF when we were talking about development stuff a while back? What was your role then?
Okay, so IPRF was interesting. I mean, I'll give you a quick background of how that all started, right? I mean, obviously it was Marcus, myself, and Tiff. And it was really funny. We were the three of us were invited onto a French Facebook group, right? Which we hijacked. And we pulled in Scott Sadley, we pulled in Shannon Kay, pulled in literally all the top shooters that we could get our hands on, interested guys. We had about 15 to 20 people from, I think, 6 or 7 different countries on that group. And literally the French were like, which is kind of cool. And so we started there. And then we had the very first meeting of the IPRF actually happened. By the way, I've moved to Ireland, right? So I've moved over here, right? And funny enough, the first meeting of the IPRF happened 40 minutes from where I now live, in the Tullamore Hotel. And it was Scott Sadley was there. It was the Guardian match. Do you remember they had the Guardian match over in Ireland? Yep. And it was literally the day after the Guardian match. I happened to be in Ireland that weekend as well. And came over, and Scott was there, Marcus was there, Tiff was there, a couple of guys from Ireland were there. And we basically sat down and started trashing it out. And I'm not a guy who needs to be in the limelight. In fact, I don't like to be in the limelight. I tend to like to be getting the work done, understanding how things need to be done, and making it happen, right? And we realized very early on that I'm not the figurehead. I'm not the guy who needs to go out there, and we realized that, you know, between Tiff, Marcus, and myself, we needed somebody who was like recognized. And it was kind of funny. In that first meeting, we said to the whole thing, we got to the end of this meeting, right? Everybody super excited about the whole development of the IPRF, and wow. And we said, right, we need a chairman. And they all kind of looked at me, and I said, no, we're going to nominate Scott. And Scott like literally looked like a rabbit in the headlights. Like, what the hell? And he's like, he thought about it for like 5-10 seconds. He went, hell, I'll do it. Cool, I'm in. and he pioneered. You know, he stood up there, and he basically created that lighthouse. You know, the person we could all focus on to get behind and drive it forward. And in the background, he had Tiff and myself really with the two engines behind it. I mean, Tiff and I pretty much did all the documentation and work behind the scenes in making that whole side of it work. At the same time, both of us were trying to sort out problems I was sorting out the problems in South Africa and trying to get that structure right. Tiff was trying to do the same in the UK. And it was like juggling with knives and chainsaws at the same time.
I mean, and at that point, the time that you and I started speaking the most was around the time that it's safe to say, when I was involved in GPRA, I had aspirations to try and look at the development side of
absolutely,
as opposed to the competition side where you've already got established shooters. And I know it was something that you were quite passionate about, and we had many a conversation about how to potentially fill that void. But if I can be completely blunt, I think we both became aware of the fact that there wasn't the traction across the whole infrastructure to do that, and it was almost it felt like a bit of a folly. Is the problem?
I think there's a time for it, and looking back on the whole thing, I think there's a time for that, and I think we are now better approaching that time, right? That there has to be a maturity in the development of sport before you can get to start thinking about, right, we've got our feet on the ground now. We've got our feet wet. Let's now, we need to take it to the next level up, right? It's no longer about having your say in a organization, right? And putting your hand up saying, I'm going to run for committee, right? And that's kind of past now. You know, we've now got to get to the step now where we've got to start looking at development of the sport.
Yeah.
And that's on many levels. I mean, you and I have spoken about the sports pyramid, right? And quite at length. But I think the time now, we're now ready for correct structure going forward and getting the sport going.
I think in terms of correct structure, I'm quite keen that you and I, and anyone out there that's listening who may be a participant or a spectator or a fan of precision rifle, which is a very young sport, I think it's important that we have to take a moment to talk about some of this terminology, because terminology is massive. And one of the biggest distinctions that I like that you make, and I've made for a long time, is the distinction between shooter or sportsman and athlete.
Yeah.
And it's been something that I've always thought to myself, that's where we need to focus a lot of our efforts into a shifting mindset in developing athletes and not shooters. That sort of terminology like development, you don't hear development. You hear development, certainly in the UK, we've got a development squad on this competition. So it's people that are going at a slower pace and they're getting a bit of guidance and what have you. But the word development is very rarely used in terms of those people that are out there shooting on a regular basis. Although, as though from the outside looking in, you think these people are the finished product. And you think that people turn up to shoot as the finished product. And it has no cognizance for me of what's coming up behind them. How is that structured? How is that healthy? How is it sustainable? So what's your thoughts on the terminology we should be using if we're going to take this sport to where it should be going?
Well, just by the fact of having a recognized organization. In other words, in the UK, you guys have got the GBPRA. Here in Ireland, we've got the IEPRA. South Africa, there is the SAPRF. Just by setting that structure up correctly, right, and being aligned with an international federation, allows you to then approach your national sporting body. Now, every single country has got its own structure of how that looks, right? In South Africa, it went from club to district, from district to provincial, from provincial to national, and national to international, right? And each of those levels, you're expected to have committees and so forth. And I think it was, with 9 different provinces in the country, it started actually getting ridiculous that I think we needed every single person in the entire sport in South Africa to be on committees in order just to fulfill the structure that the sport needed, right? Which is just dumb. So you've got to be realistic. You need to set certain levels, right? But the cool thing about what you're doing is that there is a structure that is set already. So you guys, British shooting will have their structure. They will say, this is how we want things done, right? It will not British, it'll be British shooting at the top of it, I presume. Yeah. And you'll have several organizations underneath that.
I'm not going to lie, for the benefit of this discussion and for people listening, having had these discussions as part of the GPRA, the whole question of who is the governing body of precision rifle is still a bit of a hazy one. By default, it's the NRA. By default,
I don't know that that's true. Actually,
until you get clarification on it, clarification on it, I think the super authority. Sorry, go on.
The super authority, right, is probably British shooting, right, and then underneath them they'll probably have, I think there are 3 or 4 what they call associations, right? So British shooting is the national body, the governing body, and then you've got 3 sub-associations underneath that, and then each of those associations will have sub-sports within each association, right? So you've kind of got that structure. Then if you look sideways in parallel with that structure, and this is where things get a bit entertaining, right? You're going to find that you've probably got British shooting will be divided into England shooting, Northern Ireland shooting, Wales shooting, and Scottish shooting as sub-bodies, right? Or else there's sports frameworks underneath those areas, okay? And I don't know how it gets underneath that. Somebody's going to have to do some research to figure that out, right? But there'll be frameworks that are in place that allow people in those areas to work with those bodies to develop the sport further. Because remember, the whole point behind behind national sport is to have mass participation and then sporting excellence at the top end of it, which is the Olympics. The Olympics are on right now. That's where we want to go, right? That's kind of the top of the sport. But on mass participation, and there's a really great saying. It was the motto for South African sport, which was an active nation is a winning nation, right? How cool is that, right? And that pyramid that we spoke about beforehand, right? So you've got now you think of all these different levels of sports, right? And these different organizations, all of them come back to what we call a sports development program or pyramid. Right.
Well, we'll get just to pause on that, just to labour the point, to remove any confusion. The understanding that I have in the UK is in terms of shooting sports that are recognised as disciplines.
Right.
In the shooting sports, Sports England, all those government recognised organisations that can attract funding, be it governmental or lottery or whatever it might be. You don't see any of the sports that are undertaken typically by the NRA in the Olympics. Then when the GBPRA, for all the right reasons, looked at the sphere of becoming a governing body to be able to attract funding and the support that they deserve and need to move shooting on in the country, or precision rifle shooting in the country, the position becomes subservient to the NRA. So the NRA are ultimately, on a tiered point of view, the organisation directly above the GBPRA until something changes. Now, I'm sure the NRA, in the size that it is, will have access to the national governing body for sport, because it's all one thing, isn't it? Every sport's a sport, be it golf or be it shooting. And I think what people miss in this country is because that isn't a clear pathway with a clear delineated structure, the funding isn't there. So the funding that you were probably able to apply for or aspire to get in South Africa, because of how well thought out your structure was and how you had one eye on that funding, we didn't have any idea about funding when we set up the GPRA. It wasn't set up to work towards an infrastructure that was already paying money out to support athletes. And I think that's where we missed a trick in hindsight, because we weren't experienced enough to understand the things that you knew when you steered South Africa the way you did, if that makes sense. And it's a shame, because it's a real missed opportunity, I think.
I don't know. I think that I think that there's still an opportunity. Remember, you've always got the ability to interface with that organization above you. It's how you choose to do that is entirely up to your national committee. And you will find, I should be very surprised if the NRA doesn't have sport development subsections to them, right? Yeah. They will have a whole lot of things in there where they'll have lottery program funding that'll be available. There will be possibly interfaces with different clubs. There will be a whole lot of levels that you'll be able to get into in terms of coaching, in terms of support systems, and talking about mental, sports development, sports psychologists for shooters and stuff like that. Your top high performance shooters really should be dealing with those guys. There might be programs available to assist them at the NRA level, right? NRA will then have the ability to deal with that higher up. But in order to do it, you've got to have a committee that's got an aspiration to do that, right? And then, sorry, that's actually unfair. I think that's unfair, because there's no. You've got to, in order to get good at something, right? Let's take an athlete, right? So how long does it take to become an expert? What's the old saying? How long does it take to become an expert? 10,000 iterations of a single. They call it 10,000 iterations, right? Mm-hmm. So in other words, if you sit there and you pull the trigger, 10,000 good, perfect trigger pulls, right? It's probably safe to say at the end of that, you're going to be an expert at pulling the trigger, right? But then you've got to add it into all the other things that we do in our sports. So it's 10,000 each of those iterations to become an expert, right? So going back to when I was setting up the Precision Rifle Federation in South Africa and then the international stuff, right? I stopped becoming a shooter for 5 years, right? Because I had to take those 10,000 hours, that period of time, and I had to give that away to focus on building the sport. I mean, literally, it's hours. I mean, I was probably putting in 20 to 30 hours a week just on precision rifle administration and building the sport, right? And I think it's unfair sometimes. And again, it's the development of the sport, right? So at the moment, everybody gets involved. You've got a whole lot of super excited people, and they put their hand up because they want to have their say, right? Having a say is fine when you start out, but as a sport gets more mature, having a say is not good enough. You actually need to do some work. Yeah. You need to get out there and actually go, what are we standing for? What are we doing? What are we going to develop? Who are we going to develop? What do we need to do? Where's funding available? How do we interface into a structure that we have chosen to be part of? In other words, this government structure. And what can that do for us? Because it's there for you guys to take. It's there.
And I think in that maturity as well, I think you also need to move from being enthusiasts to being subject matter experts, or at least people with understanding and knowledge of these areas. Yep. One of my biggest observations, I remember when I was asked to put my hat in the ring to go in the GPRA, and it was because I wasn't a competitive shooter, not precision rifle anyway. Crikey, I was down a roundhouse with Tiff shooting golf balls on strings before precision rifle even existed. But what I found as I went along is that if you've got athletes, if you've got sportsmen that are involved in the sport on a committee making decisions about the sport, you're almost in the position where turkeys are voting for Christmas. And I think you don't get the impartiality. Yeah. I know you're going to be more polite than me.
Because I don't disagree with you, right? But I don't think it's not a natural progression, right? Okay. So you can't get to be an expert without being really passionate about what's going on, right? You're really into it. But there's nobody around you. You guys are, you've got the pioneers of the sport. You've got the guys out there in the Wild West firing the pistols, shooting the Indians, and they're not administrators. Okay, like your top level shooter should not be thinking about administration. He's got to be pulling that trigger 10,000 times. That is what there should be a bunch of people supporting him to pull that trigger 10,000 times, right? He shouldn't be necessarily on a committee, because you're starting to reduce his capabilities, right?
Yeah.
Because he should be pulling a trigger, right? And it then becomes unfair because you create expectations. As the organization gets bigger, you start creating frustrations in the organization because people are going, well, hey man, this isn't getting done. Well, what do you expect? You know, you've got an athlete out there, right? Who's wanting to pull a trigger because he's a top athlete, right? And you're expecting him to be on a committee. That doesn't work.
And again, athlete's key word. Athlete for me implies that you're continuously developing that person, or at least supporting their development.
Yeah, absolutely.
You're giving them some tangible support in terms of their performance, as opposed to a freelance sharpshooter who just looks out for themselves. That governing body, that association, should have a vested interest and a declared structure for developing that individual, or developing all the individuals at their respective levels.
Well, and I think that's where we start moving on to what is internationally the sports pyramid. And you and I have spoken about this thing at length now, right?
I mean, I'm sure I can do a screen sharing thing for people out there in podcast land, and I can work out how to do it. You keep talking. I'll see if I can find the.
So the sports pyramid is really it's an incredibly simple pyramid, and it's to do with populations in sport effectively, right? At the top of the pyramid, you've got the elite shooter, elite athlete. Then below that, you've got high performance, and then below that, participation level. You got at the top there, and then below that, you've got foundation. That's the one, yeah.
So that's the one. If I can get that to work, can you? I'm guessing everyone can see my screen. There we go.
So each of those levels kind of alludes to a population, right? You've got at the top in any one country, you've probably got like one, maybe two elite athletes, right? Those are the top of the top. Those are the guys that are pretty much either first, second, or third at every single match, regardless of what they do. They're at the top, right? And then you've got a level below that, which they call performance in this, but I've always referred to it as high performance, which is your level where you have got a whole bunch of guys that are possibly knocking on team doors, right? Okay, and they're going to be competing for your team. In other words, representing either your country, your province, or your club, right? Now, again, this pyramid is not a national basis pyramid. Okay, this pyramid can be applied at whatever level of the sport that needs to be applied. It can be applied at club level, right? Your lead shooter in your club is your club captain, right? And then obviously going from high performance, we go down to participation. That's your guys that are they're there because they don't want to mow the lawn on the weekend, right? They love it. They love the sport. They love being part of it. They love the smell of the gunpowder after a shot. They just enjoy being part of it. They enjoy getting a score between 40 and 70%, right? And 40 and 60%. And they kind of like really, they have a great time at each match. And at the match, if they can, they'd probably bring the barbecue along, and they'd be, organize one driver, the other guys have a couple of beers afterwards, and it's fun, it's social, and that's participation. Then below that, you kind of got the foundation level. And this is really your people who are just getting into the sport, right? And that's kind of your entry point, even the point that those are the guys at the range that you talk to about getting into the sport, right? It's not just it's not your so let me restart that. It's not your people who are outside of the sport, right? So sorry, let me just go there should be another level underneath this, which is what they brought into in South Africa, which is an interesting level they call transformation. It's had some different concepts back then, right? But it basically what it means is that transformation is your level of people who are interested in getting in the sport. In other words, these are your YouTube followers, your the guys who come to match and sit on the sidelines and they spectate a couple of times, They enjoy, they're interested, but they aren't getting into it, right?
Mhm.
And this pyramid can be basically put onto at any level of sport, be it national, be it provincial, be it club, whatever level. And at each point, you need to be looking at what does each of those levels, what do we want to try and achieve at each of those levels? So this is kind of your chart when you go to a meeting and at your local club. This is the chart that should be on the wall, right? This should be the chart of being, hey man, what are we going to do to help those guys in elite? What are we going to do to get for high performance guys? How do we get more people into the sport? And how can we help people on the range?
And equally, this, like you said, this goes across any sport. However, for some of these sports, the foundation level and a transition level below it is government policy, kids doing PE at school level stuff, isn't it? You know, kids in the UK, kids in the UK playing football and rugby. That's their first experience of those two sports at school doing physical education.
Yes, it is. It can be applied that way. Often is applied that way, right? But don't get conned into thinking that that's the only way it is. When they talk about foundation, it doesn't just mean school sport. You'll see many diagrams, and when you do a search on Google Images or whatever for the sports pyramid, right? You'll see the bottom layer will say school sport, sport participation at school, etc. Right?
It's in the next one. The next one we're going to move on to is in that one, funnily enough.
Yeah, but generally that's a narrow application of this, right? Let's rather say foundation is guys that are shooting other sports. They could be shooting clay target sports. They could be shooting gallery rifle, that type of stuff, right? And that they're already shooting, and they've got their foundation skills in place. They might start shooting their first club match, right? And that kind of starts pushing them into participation a little bit, right? But so we've got to be quite careful on shoehorning the pyramid. It's better to understand the holistics of what the pyramid means, right? And then being able to apply it at each level, so that when you go to a meeting at your local your sports committee, right? You pull up this diagram and be saying, hey man, what are we doing at each of these levels? What does it mean?
But the point I want to make is that for a lot of sports that are already accepted and recognised as having easy pathways in, we're not one of those sports. That it's a sport that is competing alongside other sports, established sports. So there's a lot of F-class shooters in the UK, a lot of CSR shooters in the UK. For some of these pyramids, they've got a great root system already established through traditions in a country like school sports.
Yep, absolutely. And yes, and that's why often you'll see at the bottom of it starts in schools. So foundation is going to generally, let's take soccer. Your foundation of the sport is going to start in school. Yeah. You're going to get introduced to it there. Your PE teacher is going to say to you, hey, let's go kick a soccer ball around, right? And so on. But yeah, so this pyramid really is, it needs to be looked at whatever you're doing. Right, and I'm not saying it's not just the athlete side of it, but obviously you've got to apply it to the coaches, you've got to apply it to the sports structures, you've got to apply it to basically athletes, coaches, and your match directors. And
also you've got to be cognizant of it in terms of any funding that you might have at your disposal as a governing body or an organisation that oversees it, because what you don't want is a disproportionate spend at different levels, because in some ways you can actually have a significantly counterproductive result from spending money in the, I'll say, in the wrong areas, maybe in areas that you're already well supported or you've already got coverage.
Absolutely, because I mean, if you look at this, right, this pyramid is effectively a population pyramid, right? That's your ratio. You've got a couple of elite shooters. You've got a pile more high performance shooters, but not a large amount, maybe like 5 to 10. And then you go into participation, you've got like maybe sort of 50. And then onto foundation, you've got like maybe 1,000.
Yeah.
So it's definitely, you've got to look at it and go, this is a population pyramid. In the end
and I think it's also a very healthy subconscious tracking device as well. In that I've sat quite quietly in the background whilst I've only stepped away from the GPRA relatively recently. For the past 12, 18 months, I've sat watching shooters come through in the UK. You know, I may have seen them turn up events when they were just getting into it, and I'm watching people slowly creep up through a combination of their application, the support they've got, self-funded support they've got in terms of what they can afford to buy kit-wise, and also an increase in skill through that repetition. And I find it fascinating. And the interesting measure will be how high some of those relatively new shooters in the grand scheme of things, who weren't there at the inception of the sport, progress. I find that fascinating personally.
Yep, no, absolutely. And it's nice to see, obviously, if there are development programs in place, how they're progressing with the help of those programs, if there are any in place. If there aren't, it's just osmosis.
No, it's self-motivation from these people. There may be some mild industry support that they're lucky to latch onto, but most of these people are entirely self-motivated. Some of the juniors get a bit of a push. You know, Andy Smith will be the first one to tell me how much he's on at Noah to move up. One of the more promising juniors in the UK. So his dad gives him a push, but some of the people I'm talking about are entirely self-motivated, entirely self-sufficient, not affiliated to any organisation or manufacturer to a great extent, which is a shame. Well, it's good that it's happening, but it's a shame that they're not getting formal support through, or at least, or if nothing else, being told this is where they progress to. So being down and say, congratulations, you're really good, you're doing well, this is where you are now. We as an organisation would like to see you progress in the following way. What do you need from us? What can you give to us? How can we work together? That athlete development piece, which I know you were quite keen on bringing. I don't know if anyone had one, but whether the IPRF model that you created to have an athlete development officer, if you remember that.
Yeah, it's something I proposed, I think 2 years ago, and I don't think it's gone any further.
No.
I mean, I dropped off the committee.
I was all over it.
At end of 22, I was burnt out. I'd been doing precision rifle for 5 years. Just by then, it was 7 years straight. I bought a house over in Ireland. I was moving. I was just completely burnt out. There was no way I could continue with trying to run a sport at that time. It was impossible. But I don't think they've taken it any further since then. I think, again, they haven't got the knowledge yet, right? Again, that volatility hasn't calmed down. So we still haven't got to the point where people are saying, well, hold a second, what can we do for the sport, right? And money isn't, by the way, money doesn't work on it. It's time. It's time and effort you've got to put in, right? First of all, there is no money, right? Unless you can convince a sponsor to get involved, right?
And even then, they've not got as much money as people think.
Yeah, the hard part about getting a sponsor involved is getting them the bang for the buck that they spend on it, right? Yeah. Because effectively, you got to understand that anything a sponsor is going to spend on a development program, right, is their marketing budget. Yeah, and effectively, what are they going to get out of that marketing budget? How can they use that effectively? And I think we need to understand that as a sport is that we need to create something that is beneficial to our sponsors as a want, right? There are big sponsors out there who very much believe that the development of sport is starting at the junior level, right? And those are the guys we should be hooking into and saying, hey man, we've got this great program. We've got this great idea, let's build it.
And I think equally, if you're an association or a governing body, you have to understand these things to have credibility speaking to other associations and governing bodies.
Absolutely. They'll laugh at you if you don't.
Here's a good example. I've been very fortunate recently to have a lot of conversation with the British Young Shooters Association, who've been up and about for years doing what they do. They're doing some fantastic work, bringing young shooters through. And it's quite a mature association organisation. Now, organisations like that and other organisations that exist don't struggle to get traction because they have things like athlete development plans. They have things like progression, clear progression paths. They have a policy for grassroots entry into a sport in terms of physically, financially supporting individuals. They have one eye on representing or getting underrepresented parts of the community shooting. And I think they're the mature subject matters you need to understand and have someone eloquent enough to articulate them if you're going to be taken seriously by the other associations, the national governing bodies, and ultimately the government.
Absolutely.
They're fluent in.
Absolutely. And that's what I keep saying to the guy, I always keep saying is understand your national sports model, right? They can't fit you have to fit into them, right? They're trying to deal with a whole pile of different sports, right? I mean, I should imagine that the likes of NRA are going to say, hey guys, that's great. Love you guys. Love what you're doing.
Love your energy,
but you need to fit in with what we're doing, right? And it's a matter of trying to understand what their structure is. So somebody's got to spend the time and effort going there, having the meetings, talking to them, reading, and a lot of the stuff, I mean, a massive amount of this information is actually publicly available. Just,
and equally, if you're cute enough to learn the lingo, doors open.
Totally.
We've all been in meetings with people who are subject matter experts, and when you begin to engage with them at a level that they're comfortable with, all of a sudden you see opportunities that weren't there before, just because you're accepted, and you're not the new kid on the block to a great extent. But I think until you have someone who understands the subject matter, you can't see some of the opportunities or a lot of the opportunities.
Absolutely. I mean, it was quite kind of funny, and this is a funny story on the along those lines. So when we were Grant Anderson and I were Grant was my vice president in South Africa, freaking awesome guy, and he helped me a huge amount in getting the South African Precision Rifle Federation up off the ground. And the two of us I flew up to Johannesburg and we drove down to Vereniging to the meeting with the South African Sport Shooting Confederation. So this was the big meeting. This is the meeting to introduce ourselves, put our case forward as we would like to join your organization. We'd like to do, we're trying to do everything correctly, et cetera, et cetera. It was the first big meeting, and we went there with almost, I think it was about 2 inches of documentation, right? We had our rules and regulations, we had our constitution, we had our code of conduct in line with the South African Olympic Committee's code of conduct. We had a judicial code with arbitration, disciplinary processes, appeal processes. We had conflict of interest of sports. I mean, you name it. We had this monster chunk of documentation. We walked in the door and we dropped it on the table. And they were like, wow. They had never seen any organization in the history of South African sports shooting ever walk in the door with every single piece of required documentation on day one, right? So 45 minutes later, they turned around to us and said, okay, you guys are in. We were like, what? We couldn't believe it. I mean, literally, we could not believe it. They literally went, you guys have already fulfilled everything that we need of you right off the bat, before we even start off the starting blocks. And straight away, we were accepted with a unanimous decision after a 45-minute meeting. It was astounding. So, but we spoke the language. I went in there with the framework that we'd had to put in place for equestrian, right? All the required documents that they needed. I mean, they didn't even ask us for it. We went in there with what the government needed from them and went straight in the door.
And I think don't get me wrong, as time goes on, you'd hope people become more fluent in the language, the terminology, and the understanding, and obtain an understanding going forwards. And only time will tell whether certain organisations and associations find that traction. I'm just going to pull up the other pyramid just for the. Oh, did that stop then? I think I just pressed the wrong button.
You're good. No, you're fine.
So it's that one. So the other one, which is different but the same, is this. So move stuff around. So this is, on face value, could be seen to be the same thing. However, you've mentioned a few times about regional competition. So I think this is more focused on having established competitions or having an established framework that then sophisticated enough to have a multi-layered approach, if that makes sense. Because
so what you're looking at here, right, is this is basically a national framework. Okay, so this is at your national level framework. This is not something like a provincial level framework. This would be a national level framework.
Yeah, and so it would imply that you have a sport participating at a number of levels.
Yeah.
Now, the previous pyramid, you could have two matches taking place in a country a year and have engagement at all those levels in terms of elite down to sort of development or foundation, I think it was on the last one.
It's difficult.
This implies you've got lots of competitions taking place at different skill levels,
yes,
geographical pull levels, all the way through to acknowledgement that you're performing at a certain level. So yes. Someone would say, well, I'm a precision rifle shooter, and I'm competing in national competitions on a regular basis. I'm competing in regional competitions on a regular basis. And I think this shows once your sport's mature enough to have a lot of activity going on, it's how you then, as a governing body or an association that keeps track of the sport, is how you then decide what those regions are.
Well, I think it's quite important to understand that our sport is very, very hard to put on, right? So, as a match director, when I started being a match director, I put on some pretty insane matches. I mean, yeah, the targets are small, difficult, challenging conditions. I mean, we were shooting the match I ran was a 2-day match. And the first day you had a kilometer-long hike with the 200-meter elevation climb, shooting in 270 degrees of shooting direction. Right, with stages roughly every 200 meters, 150 to 200 meters. And what we learned right at the beginning, and I'm one of those guys that the tougher it is, the happier I am, right? I'm not the typical shooter. And I made some mistakes in basically crushing matches where your bottom shooter's getting, out of a possible 180 shots, he's getting 20 hits. That's crushing.
We went through a little phase of that over here, and I had people contacting me saying, "This sport's too hard for me. I'm out." And these were experienced shooters in other disciplines, and I was having to say to them, "No, you've had quite a tight target selection there."
So look at this pyramid, right? Look at this pyramid that we got in front of us, right? So you can't put a sport club local match at elite competition level. They'll just destroy. You can't separate the top 5 shooters, right? It'll be very difficult to do. It'll be a matter of pot luck, or something goes wrong for one of them, right?
Yeah.
And if you do it the other way around, you can't take those local club competitors to an elite competition match because you'll just break them, right? So you've got to find a way of getting the sport off the ground at the lower levels, and then having your higher matches. But at the same time, you've got to have that level in the middle where those guys who are high performance at the club level, right? They're probably participation level at national level, right? But they're knocking on that door. They want to go up to that next level, you know, to start becoming a high performance athlete at the national level. Now, the only way they're going to do that is they're going to have to travel to national level matches, right?
Yeah.
And so you've got to start creating these structures that you've got the lower matches, the easier matches, the matches that are fun, right? They create the broad base at the bottom of your national pyramid, your participation level, and then have lots of those all over the place. And you maybe run in South Africa, we ran provincial leagues. So in each province, you could actually get provincial colors in each province. Yeah. In Cape Town, we actually registered that. So what I was saying a little earlier is you've probably got those 4 different levels, right? You've probably got England, Northern Ireland, Wales, and Scotland, right? And you'll probably find that those are actually they're all part of UK sport, right? And if you interface with those guys, which is why I say that they're separate to trying to go to your normal federation, but you start dealing with them on a provincial basis, one, you might find you got funding there. You might well find that there's actually funding for each of those different areas, right? But then you'd be able to start creating intra-country team competition.
Well,
So instead of just
and yeah, so go on, finish what you're saying, because I only put my hand up because I didn't need to give
and so
too
what
far
that
back.
does is that starts creating a healthy lower level organization, lower level targets for people who are participating in the club, who are your elite shooters in each club and your high performance in each club. Start creating a smaller pyramid within the country that they start it's a aspirational goal to get to be part of that. And then from there, you springboard that into your national at the top.
Yeah, and that's why I was keen. I was waiting for you to say the word team. I like to interchange the word team and club on a regular basis when I'm talking to people about how the sport can promulgate out from one place. Some countries might just have one opportunity to shoot a year, PRS or NRL or whatever it is. That's the brand and everyone's at it. When I look at this, school sport and physical education, we'll come on to juniors in a minute. I think in the absence of having it as an accepted sport within schools, we've got to try and LoJack that, and we've got to try and invest in that to make sure that ground level is being achieved. Sports clubs is easy. Home office approved clubs. All these clubs are running events now. These are home office clubs. These aren't companies making money, and I have every respect for companies making money and running events, but these are home office clubs that by their nature have some longevity and some development within them. If those clubs then start participating with each other, against each other, inviting each other to different parts of the country to take part in competition where they're exposed to new shooters, new courses of fire, new ranges, new dynamics, new everything, you automatically build in a regional system.
Absolutely.
At the moment,
you'll find that regional is probably in place already. You just have to go
well, it is. We just haven't recognised it. So at the moment, I think the stronghold of precision rifle shooting in the UK is in Wales, personally.
Right.
Because you've got lots of Welsh shooters coming through. You've got a venue there. If you put a heat map on the UK of where a lot of shooting's happening, it's happening around Wales. Don't get me wrong, there's lots in another place in the country as well. But I think if those clubs, those teams, those companies, the Pro Shoots, the world, they then look to take what they've got and go and travel, have an away game is what I call them, going away from the home venue where they used to and traveling somewhere else. You're naturally bringing a regional element to a competition. Now, every year, you'll have 5 or 6 qualifiers, typically run by a company in the UK, which becomes your national competition where everyone comes together from up and down the country, and they're competing at that level, which then takes them on to things like qualifiers for Worlds, things that might be run by the GBPRA, finales in old money, where people have qualified out of that national level of competition and satisfied a criteria, be it just by performance, to be in an elite level competition. Then they go on to a different thing of competing internationally. So I think we have this in its raw form. It's there now. I think every level's there. People just need to understand this terminology and get the head round why it's important for a club that I shoot with to travel and shoot with a club somewhere else in the country. Now, we're trialling it. We ran the teams thing for Sensify back with the GPRA in 2022, and it's something I've been passionate about because this is your regionalisation of competition.
Well, I think one of I think if you go and ask any athlete that went to World Championships, right, what it feels like to be part of your national team. Right? It's a massive sense of pride and achievement. Right? I mean, it's huge. It's like, and you get a sense of camaraderie with your teammates, right? I mean, I know in factory division, we're all still friends. You know, you've got I stood side by side with those guys to compete. It's a part of, you actually feel like you're part of something. Mm-hmm. Right, now if you can create that at lower levels, right, at intra-club, intra-province, right, you're creating lower set aspirational points in the sport that are achievable by many more people than the 4 people who will go internationally and compete worldwide, right?
100%.
And if there is sufficient accolade in that, you'll grow the sport.
Yeah.
Because
Now,
people want to be part of something. They want to be part of a movement.
And I would say from sports club upwards, access to that movement can be fulfilled individually by people, down to buying a rifle, going along, shooting, and getting involved. So I think everything there is in place in the UK. We might not recognise it in certain ways. When you sit and look back, you go, "Oh yeah, that makes sense." The whole reason that this is important to me is because the bit that we're not doing anything with is at the bottom. And that's what this is I stand on a range talking to people about what needs to happen. Now, hopefully people in podcast land have seen this. They think, Christ, these two are boring talking about pyramids. But there's a purpose to it. Unless you invest in the bottom, you will never succeed at the top.
Correct.
Now, you and I spoke about it the other day. I think you told me about it because you didn't realise you heard it on my podcast, just saying. This is the whole 8-year investment in the Olympics. This is Japan winning the team gymnastics after a sustained period of investment, because without that investment at the ground level, you're not going to have elite level performers that you might have 1 or 2 sneak through, don't get me wrong. Talent will always come through. But equally, how much frustrated talent is there out there that didn't have the infrastructure to support it getting to an event? You know, that African footballer that never gets recognized, he's kicking around in the field. I think we've got to be grown up and say, if we expect to be respected as a sport, and if an association wants to be respected by its participants, the question needs to be asked, what is being done to build the foundation of this pyramid to try and give everyone an opportunity to come through, and also allow your talent to come through and be recognised. So,
absolutely.
So I'll get rid of this because this was...
So just on that point, right? That would have been I should imagine that after the Olympics, in the 2016 Olympics, right, the Japanese probably went back to Japan and went, right, this is not good enough. How do we win? How are we going to do this, right? And they probably sat down and they looked at this pyramid and they went, how do we attack it? And from what angles, right? What do we need to do to get to put more people into the elite bracket? We don't just want one guy there. We want 5. Because we've got 5, it means if 1 gets sick, we've still got 4. Right? In order to do that, we know we've got to have 10 times more people in our high performance. And if we want 10 times more people in high performance, we need from below that another 50 times more in our participation level. And we need another 1,000 times in our base level. How do we do that? Right? And they would have then looked at it and they would have gone, right, in terms of our organization structure, how do we do that? Are we casting our organization structure wide enough? Not just one national structure. What about, they probably would have done I don't know if Japan's got a whole lot of states or provinces, I don't know. They probably would have said, right, how do we motivate each of those provinces to be better, right? To make sure that the right people are in those positions to then start creating, to decentralize the organization, right? But have the same goal. So in other words, they got together with meetings and so forth, ran training sessions on their organization level. You know, then they would have had, they've got the athletes. Now, how do you support the athletes? Well, you've got to have great coaches. Where are the coaches? Why do we not have any coaches? Why do we not have coaches in the sport? I mean, that blows my mind. Why do we not have coaches in precision rifle? Ask any equestrian athlete, right? When I was competing as a high-level equestrian athlete, at one point I was having 8 lessons a week, right? Okay, 8 1-hour lessons, 8 1-hour training sessions with a coach, but actually with 3 different coaches, right? A week to get to that point, right? Then you've got to deal with the organizers, match organizers. Have you got the correct level of competitions? Are you putting the correct level of competitions in the right place in front of the right athletes? So there has to be, from a national level, there has to be a very coordinated vision of, we need to apply this structure, the sports pyramid, at every single level all the way through.
Now, what we have in the UK, based on that pyramid, and when we look at the club, we use the word club because I like the word club.
Yeah, club's a big part of it.
Club's a massive part of it because a club can independently do this for their area because clubs are geographical. Don't get me wrong, there are some clubs that are just when I say club, for the benefit of people in podcast land, I'm talking about home office approved clubs. You might want to be the next greatest shooter, you might want to do this, but unless you've got a home office club to support you doing it legally and all that sort of stuff, you're pissing up against the wind. Clubs are ideally placed to take a look at this and say there's a real opportunity here to recruit young club members, which has been an issue with clubs as long as I've been involved in running clubs, but also utilise the existing framework they've got, where they've got coaches. Coaches, unfortunately, at the very elite level, the coaches you want are the people that have retired from elite level sport and come back in as non-shooting participants with the experience to call upon. And when you're a young sport, you don't have that. We'll get there eventually when people, the Charles Coopers of the world and all those people who fall out of the sport and aren't shooting anymore and want to get back in, then they'll be there. What clubs have is an infrastructure for training already. So an NRA affiliated club in the UK, if it's a good club, as ours is, should have NRA qualified instructors who have an understanding of developing all the members. And all you need to do is activate those clubs to say, we want you to focus on developing some kids and bringing some kids through. The question then is, how do you encourage those people to do it? Or how do you encourage those clubs to do it? And I think at the moment, there is no tangible way to encourage them apart from a sense of a warm, fuzzy feeling in your chest that you're doing some good. And I think we're missing a trick because this is where other sports have funding opportunities to fund coaches and to fund programs.
Absolutely.
Until the organisations are tapped into the funding we spoke about in the first 10 or 15 minutes of the podcast, that money is the gateway to it all, personally, because everything costs money. Time, kit, range time, travelling, money.
100%. I think just looking back on, we talked about a little bit earlier, was the concept of the maturity of the sport, right? And at this point, the sport's too young, I think, is probably one of the reasons we don't have a lot of coaches. And in that you've said, the coaches are the guys who've competed at the sport, they've got older, they've got slower, and they're now high participation level. Maybe they've just dropped down to being participants and enjoying the sport for what it is, right? And they've dropped out of competition entirely, and they're wanting to give something back to it. We're not really there yet because we've only been 3-4 years, right? 5 years, right? So I should think that we'll start seeing that happen. But really, the fastest progression that you're going to get on as an athlete is to be coached by somebody else.
And I think the fact that there are shooters out there, certainly in the UK, who are offering precision rifle instruction. So the GBPRA, I remember writing the PR1 course. Alex White, I have to mention Alex White, who you know very well.
Yeah.
Every podcast, it's part of the
He's a good lad.
Alex was going to be running that, and I remember, the PR1 course and so on that the GBPRA run is great, and there's been some people been running them recently, but I think that motivation to coach has to be something you want to do. And I think my most open and honest observation in relation to where we're missing an opportunity is that it's all right tapping into funding for international events. So we're going to travel to America. Let's get some funding for the team. A fantastic cause. But I think we should be looking at some funding streams.
I was about to say that funding's 8 years too late.
Well, we should be looking at some funding streams to get some of these things up and running. So if you've got people within the organisations already, let's look to try and develop some coaching structures that isn't costing people to pay to come on. Because you and I spoke about the retention of those mid-level shooters, and that's really, really important. But people don't get to be mid-level shooters unless they enter the sport. And I think retention, for me, the two most important things that need to be focused on is retention of mid-level shooters and bringing in new shooters. And in my experience, bringing in wealthy, or no, wealthy isn't the word, bringing in people that can afford to, or already afford to shoot, who are shooting CSR somewhere else and are just having a change of scenery by switching sports isn't difficult. What about the people out there that just can't afford to get into the sport? The kids that can't afford to get into the sport? They're your next mid-level shooters. They're your,
Well, I think that's
being overlooked because they can't afford a seat on the bus.
I mean, I think at that point, again, you've got to look at your pyramid, right? And there's the inverse pyramid to the sports development pyramid, which is your investment pyramid, right?
Yeah.
Those are the bottom of the sport, least amount of investment. Those are the top of sport, highest amount of investment, right? But at the bottom of the sport, if you've got no money in the sport, right, which actually it's not just precision rifle, just generally every single sport doesn't have money in it. You've got to look at ways to generate that. Now, you can either do that if you're a national committee level or provincial committee level, you've got to decide, hey, we want to develop this. How do we get more people in, right? What are we going to do? Are we going to run open days? Are we going to run training sessions? Are we going to get, if we're going to support our top athletes to go to world championships, right, and provide any type of funding that goes with them, right, there needs to be a piece of string tied to them that says, hold a second, chaps, if we're going to give you X thousand pounds, right, that also equals X thousand pounds worth of tuition that you really need to give on to next level people. In other words, if we can pay you a bit of money to give for your airfare, that will equate to 5 training sessions throughout the next year that you've got to give to whatever level, right? This is just an idea, right? And then the other side of it is getting in a big sponsor and somebody who is a brand name in the sport who wants to be involved and is interested, right? And sees the vision of bringing on young competitors. I think Remington did this back in the States. You remember that whole program in, I think, F-class.
You're older than me.
In the 60s.
Yeah, you're well older than me.
Yeah. And those companies are interested in getting into that because they see the investment in that competitor. Because when a competitor is invested in by somebody, they inherently have a belief in that investor.
Absolutely. Yep.
Right. And we'll always go, well, those are the guys who helped me to get into the sport, right? And will be effectively brand loyal in the future.
And people see that, and people, there's a lot of people like that. Don't get me wrong, there's a lot of people like fast cars, but there's a lot, equally, probably more people that see a good story with a wholesome narrative.
Absolutely.
It's the whole, I remember this conversation with one of the big manufacturing marketing guys about how do you sell a rifle to a 40-year-old? Well, you sell them on when they're 15 and they never step away. And I think some people like that. They like, in this day and age of horrendous, every time you turn the news on, there's a negative story, something positive about something that you're doing day in, day out. We like
exactly,
that.
And I mean,
we're doing it.
And at the same time, there's that whole side of it of fathers and sons, or fathers and daughters. It's mothers and daughters coming to the range. Bring, if you invest in a kid, right, you actually sell 2 rifles, one to the kid, right? Well, actually, the dad buys 2 because he wants to take part as well.
So then it becomes a question of you either have the infrastructure at a organizational, I'll say governmental level, because that makes it sound like it's far more established and what have you, or you look at other funding opportunities to enhance that either existing or non-existing infrastructure. And you look at things like academies, and you look at things like supported shooter programs. And for me, it's dead simple. You put events on for kids in whatever lawful way you can do it, be it part of a home office club or an event at a commercial range, whatever it might be. And you either make it cost effective or free or whatever you do, and you look to introduce those kids to the sport and see what takes. Because like anything, you're going to have an attrition rate with kids getting into a sport. Now, some kids, I've been lucky. I've had some kids who've come to shoot with us. You know, Noah came from shotgun shooting, and he knew that he liked the bang, and off he went. A young lady that shoots with us at the moment, she's come through the academy called Amy, who shot non-FAC stuff to a decent standard and realised she liked it, progressed in. But for some of these kids, they'll have been playing rugby or football for the last 5-10 years, and they might just say, do you know what, I don't like it. So you're going to have that attrition rate of people washing against the shore and going off. So you've got to have a sustained income stream for it. Otherwise, it's a flash in the pan. It's a thing you do once and it never works. You've got to persist with it. And I think, personally, this is me being outspoken as Joe, I think that there's probably an obligation from industry to step in and do this bit now, personally. It sounds bold.
I think that you're hopeful on that, and that's just me being honest, right? I think that the level, there's two parts to this. I think that at the lowest level of getting into it, right? By you doing what you're doing in terms of creating this the academy, right? I hope that there are more people in the UK and in your catchment pit area, right, in the sport that are going to do the same thing, right? Because when you create an academy and somebody else has got an academy, now it means you can compete against each other. There's two academies, right?
It's regional competition straight away, isn't it? Right,
it's regional stuff, right? Now, when you get to that level, that's when you start seeing the brands getting involved, right? Because you're no longer dealing. So what they're looking for is the brands are probably looking for the high performance level of your academy level. You know, the ones they don't necessarily want the guys who are there for participation, popping in, popping out. They're the ones who. So what you're doing is key because you're providing that base level of athlete coming up from the ground, right?
It's a feeder system. It's a feeder system for the organisations and the companies that can afford to throw the money at them that they need to progress.
Yeah. And I think going past that, I think that's. I mean, I think it's key. I mean, I think that a brand would be crazy not to get involved, knowing that those future elite athletes are coming up through those organisations.
But then again, a lot of the brands don't understand this. This is the thing. We give these companies a load of credit. We give these importers and these manufacturers a load of credit. These people are passionate about what they do. They've no understanding about the athletic structure or successful sporting structures. And I use this phrase on the last podcast. You listened to the last podcast, didn't you? I upset a lot of people on the last podcast. The thing I said about the last podcast, if you were upset by the last one, then you've got something that you probably should rethink in terms of your life choices. But I use this phrase of blind support, and it's not the fault of the manufacturer or the importer or whoever it is that's handing some dosh over. They think they're doing good by handing something over, when the reality is, if they had an understanding of the observations that people like you and I have about how the sport could be progressing at a much more wholesome way, whatever the wording is, that's how the sport could be going. They probably think to themselves, we probably could be more sophisticated about how we're invested in this sport.
That's what I was going to say.
I personally think, I said it last week on the podcast, 10 grand into a youth structure to get kids shooting is far better PR than 10 grand worth of kit to a load of shooters that have already got their own kit. And that's me being really one-dimensional. And people slated me for it. And it wasn't knocking people that had got stuff off price tables that found it useful, and the price table stuff's great. I'm just, what we've only got a certain amount of money slushing around in the sport. Yeah. Is it being distributed evenly? I don't think it is.
Okay, so I don't know that. Again, I think this comes to the maturity of the sport. I think that in the next 5 years or so, we're probably going to see a reduction in the price table type concept. I think that guys are going to get tired of it. Not necessarily the shooters, sorry, the athletes. It's going to be and actually, to be honest, let's call them shooters in terms of price tables, because it's not an athlete at that point. It's arguable, right? I think that there's always going to be I think that if we start getting the model together where we're looking at the sport pyramid model, and you've got identified athletes, brands will want to get involved with those athletes directly, right? I think then once academies start creating the new shooters coming on, right, and start showing the high performance level at the academy level, moving into regional, and then from regional into national, any sponsorship brand is going to start seeing the value of the athlete at a much lower level and want to get involved at that point, because the return on their advertising is going to be better spent at the youth level, building that person up, because effectively you're building an athlete for life. You're building a representative for life, not a flash in the pan that happens at a match, right? But it's going to take time to get there. I don't think it's something that's going to happen quick. I think that you're a pioneer in what you're doing, right, which is freaking amazing. And I hope that more people join on, because it'll only make the sport better and stronger for the whole of Britain.
Yeah, I think when you were talking about seeing the investment at lower levels, let's use another sport analogy. Look at football scouts, soccer scouts.
Correct. Yeah.
And a big club is a big manufacturer. So we'll pick we won't name a manufacturer because someone might not like it and try and sue me. But they should be looking beyond the person that is the most winningest. I said that last week a few times.
Right.
The most winningest performer, and they should be looking over that person and see who's coming up. And if they understand the sport and they've got the right connections, they'll get a heads up to who these people are. There is no surprise whatsoever that young Noah Smith is getting support from other manufacturers and importers and stuff, which is great. But that support wasn't there for him 12 months ago when he first got into it. And that's because some people are quite savvy, thinking, I can see this kid's progressing through. Let's give him some support, which is great to see that he's getting all the support. And I think if manufacturers start doing that more and start looking beyond the podium people and looking towards the kids and seeing who's coming next and supporting them, that will encourage so many kids to get involved. They will say, do you know what? It's not just about the lad I'm watching who's got 12 grams of the rifle that's competing at elite level sports and all that sort of stuff. They'll see a kid progressing through that pyramid and they'll say, I can do it now. Like anything, any positive discrimination in any employment world or any sporting world, those underprivileged, underrepresented people will start to see themselves making that journey as well. So I just plead with more manufacturers to in whatever way they can, support kids that are coming through. Yep. If you see an opportunity to support an endeavour that's promoting kids getting into sport, please support it financially with your feet. And I'd ask established competitions, to try and spread the love a bit further down to develop those mid-level shooters that I'm concerned that we need to retain, those developmental type people that are getting into the sport, because otherwise we lose the incentivization of people going to a competition because they're going there expecting to come away with zero. Now, if they know that they might come away with something before they get there and they understand the parameters, they're more likely to engage. Now, you have a very interesting position on tiered pricing for tables, don't you?
So there are not lots. I don't think there are any other sports that out there that do a prize table, right? I'm not aware of them, right?
No.
So the background that I've always had from, and this is from equestrian sport, is that they've always had a percentage of prize money, right? And this is something you've got to remember that and this is, yeah, try to explain this. The rules outlined at the IPRF level. So when you look at the IPRF rules published on the website, okay, that defines the overall sport as a whole.
Mm-hmm.
There is nothing stopping a national organization for adding another level of rules in on their organization, right? So in other words, you define the types of competitions in the UK that would qualify to be set up to be national matches. You can set terms of qualifications for a provincial match. You set a terms of qualification what would be a club match. So in other words, when somebody goes to shoot those three levels, they would know what they're getting themselves into, right? And in equestrian sport, how it worked is that I think it was I think it was 25% of all entry fees went towards prize money, right? And then 1 in every 4 competitors. So in other words, if you had 16 starters, you'd have 4 prizes, right? If you had 20 starters, you'd have 5 prizes. 21 starters, you'd have 6 prizes, right? It's commensurate. And you take that 25% and you'd split it however you wish. Generally, the first would get the big amount, second a bit lower, but all the way down. And generally, the last guy is good enough to buy a hamburger on the way home, or, you know, whatever. It's not going to cover anything, right?
But that was projected before the event, so you knew that before you turned up.
Yeah, it's in the schedule. So in other words, when you enter the competition, it actually specifies how much prize money is going to be issued, all that type of stuff, and go from there, right? And when you get to the competition and you see the divisions that are there for you to enter into, it'll actually tell you all the prizes for that type of stuff, right? And then often there'd be a sponsor who would come along and say, right, we want to sponsor maybe first prize is going to get this prize, right? Or first 3 people on the podium will get the following. And sometimes what they would do is they'd say, right, we're going to run a lucky draw for every competitor at the match, right? With the competition. So you've got a prize table of maybe 10 prizes. The winners will still get their cash money, right? But then you'd be able to go ahead and say, right, we've got a lucky draw, and that's great because then your lower shooters, your less mature athletes, right, would be in to be able to get something, you know. And ideally, you'd hope that they'd get some cool stuff, because the bigger value that gets given to a person lower down the ranks, right, the bigger the story, right? It's a wow, holy moly, I got this. This is amazing. I've always wanted one of these, and they will hold it with them, you know, for life type thing. Whereas often at the bigger levels, and I think I got quite dissuaded when, as a match director. That's one of the things that actually stopped me becoming, you know, from running matches in the end, was I kind of felt bad asking sponsors for prizes, right? Knowing that, you know, the number of times that 50% of the prizes would be on eBay before I even drove home for the match, right? And you get the phone call from a sponsor going, "Hey man, my prize, I just saw my prize that I donated, you know, over the weekend was on eBay. What's going on with that?" And, you know, I'm saying, hey man, you donated the prize. The shooter can, you know, the athlete can do what they like with it, right? That's what it is. But it was never a nice conversation that I had. It was never a fun conversation that I then had to have that following morning. And you just kind of feel at the end of it a little bit not great. And it's a lot of work trying to get prizes for a match is a massive, massive amount of work.
And again, if you're not being asked the questions about how you're spending your money by sponsors, then there's no harm done.
Yeah.
But if these sponsors are donating responsibly, they should be asking, in any advertising budget, what are we getting for the money we're putting in?
Absolutely.
That's why last week it wasn't what we were talking about, but I appealed to anyone invested in the sport to have a conscience in relation to whether that's really adding value.
Well, I think it's really just. I think it's a very easy thing to do. I think it's become a very easy thing to just happen, right? Whereas I think we've got to get into points in the next 5-10 years, however long it takes, is as the sport matures and as we start building frameworks to support our athletes, those sponsors will be given opportunities to get involved at a more meaningful level than just dropping off a prize at a match. You know, arguably what you're doing by creating an academy, right, and creating young shooters coming up through the academy is more meaningful than dropping a prize off at a match.
And we saw it firsthand. The nearest thing I've seen to like an absolute grassroots investment in precision rifle shooting in the UK was a thing that we ran very fleetingly in the GBPRA called the Spotters Academy.
Right.
That was 100% supported by RUAG and their
awesome.
brand media. And it was great because we had people coming to events who weren't shooters, who didn't even have FACs, but they were getting an insight into the sport and a foot in the door by coming along and learning how to spot and how to support a competition by spotting for comps. And it was a brilliant progression through. But I'm not going to lie to you, there was a lot of people who didn't like that. Some of the elitist ways of looking at people. So there were shooters who, if I'm completely frank, were above these people who weren't mature enough or well, I don't know what the word is, to be able to allow these people to be involved in the sport without any experience to do a simple thing like, say, impact or no impact.
Yeah.
As the elite level sport has got to the elite level of the sport has got to buy in to these novices coming through in a safe learning environment, which I've always had in my working career, that you've always got to say it's a safe learning environment, not the sort of learning environment you get in the military, where you're going to be made to look an idiot if you get something wrong in front of your peers. And I think we've got to encourage that. I think coaches is a big part of it. If you've got the right coaches, then your elite level embraces your development level and your youth level coming through, and it all sits nicely. But that's built on characters. And if you haven't got the right characters, you've got a lot of work ahead of you.
Well, I think that if you want to be an elite level athlete in the sport, right? Okay, and to be fair, those guys they've got to be pretty self-centered, right? Okay, in order to be at the top of their game. I mean, let's be real, they're elite level athletes. Yeah. They need to perform. They've got to do that, right? I think that when we get to the level that we've got coaches occurring, like you spoke about, and when there is a structure of you're being built up as to an elite athlete, you're not out there slogging at yourself like we are at the moment because there's nobody to help us, right? It is to have those frameworks where we can rely on help. There will be a better understanding in the future of that. Does that make sense?
It does make sense, yeah.
So you won't have quite so much outcry of those guys are slogging hard. They're trying to make it happen, right? Right now, they're hustling. They are hustling as much. They've sharpened their elbows, right? Because they're having to push themselves to the top. If that support structure is there in the future, right? There will be more of an understanding that you don't have to elbow your way to the top, right? You have to perform your way to the top. Does that make sense?
It makes perfect sense. And I think that elbowing your way to the top at the moment, where people have got loyalties to brands and manufacturers and what have you, combined with what you mentioned it a while back and I wrote it down and I was going to bring it back up, with what a lot of people I speak to who are in that mid-level area see as potential conflicts of interest in terms of some of the decisions that are being made. This is why it's so important that the elements of industry that we engage with as associations are transparent and involved for the right reasons and not for purely commercial gain. And I think when we see situations where companies are completely involved and interested in commercial gain, the shooters that they work with leave themselves open for any of their decisions to be questioned because they're perceived to have a conflict of interest. And people see through this stuff. People see through some of the decisions that are made and at all levels, national and international level.
I think that I have always personally stayed away from being sponsored, if that makes sense, right?
100%. I couldn't agree more.
I've had people who've been very kind to me after I've done a massive amount of work, right? Say, listen, you've done an amazing job. Come in our shop, we'll be good to you, right? And that's great. But I very, very, very much do not want to be in somebody else's pocket, right?
It's very easy with support to sacrifice a tiny bit of integrity. And I'll say tiny bit, I'm being generous there, because for some people that might be a significant amount of their own integrity for benefit, for material benefit.
I mean,
I can say that, you can't.
I'd love to hope that that's not the case, if you know what I mean. I know that it's the case. I'd love to hope that it never is the case, if that makes sense, right? Yeah. I think that, they've got that thing now on what's it on social media now? That if you are an influencer, right, and you're sponsored by somebody, you have to declare it, right? Will that change things in sport? If you're sponsored by somebody, you have to declare it. Would that change the way that people perceive you? I don't know. I'm asking a question. I actually don't know the answer to. So it's an interesting thing to debate.
I think when people are in the sport as customers, because let's not forget, this isn't playing football in a park that costs you nothing. These are all customers that are buying kit and ammunition to sustain their sport. When you're a customer, if you're having something promoted to you, I'd like to think that most people have got the nous to be able to say, why has this been promoted to me? By whom's and for what reason? And if it is the best product, it's an easy sell. But if it's something that people are buying because an influencer says buy it, now some people would say that the cynic in me would say that only weak-willed people are influenced by influencers, but we're all susceptible to a little bit of product flattery and wanting the next best thing. And I think this goes hand in hand with the issue that most manufacturers and importers have, is that sometimes they don't choose their brand ambassadors or their sponsored people very wisely, typically based on success as opposed to character. And it becomes a vicious circle, because as well as manufacturers seeing kids coming through, I'd like manufacturers to have a much more nuanced approach to deciding who they work with, so we can avoid some of the stuff that we see nationally and internationally of people with questionable characters making a faux pas, and their character creeps out when competition and excitement gets the better of them.
I think we're going to see a maturing of that in the future as we go forward.
So.
Right. I think it's definitely going to happen. I think that people aren't stupid at the end of the day, right? And the manufacturers will see through it. The other shooters see through it, and you'll get some sort of general leveling happening in the market, where a manufacturer will start saying, or a sponsor will start saying, hold a second, this is what I want out of my sponsorship. This is the deal we're going to put on the table, right? Not just a blind, well, we like what you're doing here. Just talk a little bit about us, and they'll
actually start on social media. Logos on social media. With no real substance behind it. That's what I see.
Yeah, and that'll happen. I think that'll happen in the future because there's marketing guys have really only got a certain amount of money to work with, right? And if it's not working for them, if they're not getting that bang for their buck, right, they're going to say, well, hold a second, I need to reevaluate my strategy on what I spend and the marketing money that I spend. But that'll happen in time, and I think that as long as we build the sport and the sport grows, right? I mean, if the sport grows, it means more manufacturers getting involved, and it's better for everybody. I mean, imagine having a whole lot more manufacturers involved, and your structure in place correctly. Your elite athletes will actually benefit from that.
Absolutely, but what we need to make sure along the way is that there's people reminding people of these obligations. When you say, I'm sure we will mature, we need to remind people that we do need to mature. We do need to not...
We have to have a goal.
Yeah.
So the national federation, the national governing bodies, okay, in other words, the national committees, right, and your provincial committees have to have a united goal of the development of the sport, to demonstrate that development to people from the outside who want to be involved in it.
And that could be something as simple as measuring how many people took part in a precision rifle match in 2024 and saying by 2026 we want the following amount of people, an increase of 20%. I'm being flippant in what I'm saying.
Yeah, but listen, that's
tangible, aren't they?
That's a good end goal, right? But you've got to very clearly have to have the steps in perspective and understanding on how to get there. You can't just say, "Hey, I want to have 20%." Right? You have to have a plan.
And you can't,
right?
And you can't buy it. Money can't buy it.
No.
Nuanced investment in structures can.
Yes.
So the pipelines, you have new plumbing done in your house, it will improve lots of things. You can't just hope for rain. On that note, I'm conscious you and I can go forever. We're an hour and a half and a bit in. With you and I could do another one of these very.
Oh, we could do another couple of these if you like.
Oh, we could go for hours and hours. I've been going down my list and seeing where I'm up to. I think in summary, I think what we can say is those people out there that are interested in the sport of precision rifle growing, hopefully, if they didn't already get it, will see that there's more to it than just the top 2 or 3 tiers of the pyramid. Whilst it's really important to support those areas, and I already see they're getting a lot of support, either self-generated support from individuals who are able to fund their own endeavours, or some of the industry investment in some of those people. What we've covered in quite fine detail is what's lacking below that, and the dangers of not doing that. I think for me, if people look at any investment they're making in the sport, be it the time that they're putting in as an individual or money that they're putting in as a company, is that adding value to developing shooters coming through? And that time can be, like you say, coaching. I know lots of people doing some really good work at clubs, coaching people. It's not a course. It's not something that costs money. There's a place for that. There's a place for it. I can go and do a course and learn to do maritime security and shoot pirates off the side of a ship in the Indian Ocean. There's a course for everything. I'm talking about stuff that costs now, apart from your time, in like a really wholesome environment, be it a club or be it the NRA, but Bisley or whatever it might be. So if people have one eye on adding value to the sport as opposed to participating, I think that could have an exponential effect on.
Absolutely. As I said beforehand, I think we're getting to the point now where we need to start looking at the people who are on committees, be it local, your club, provincial, national. What are they going to do for the committee, right? If you've got an opinion, everybody's got an asshole, everybody's got an opinion, right? Okay, that's not good enough.
What are you? The phrase is, opinions are like assholes. Yeah, everyone's got one. Just for the sake of
the point is, if you are, what are you going to do on that committee? Yeah. What is your job? What is your function, right? What is the direction that the chairman is putting the committee on? And the chairman really is the ringleader. He's the one who's going around. He's not actually doing any jobs himself. He's the one who's making sure that every single one of the people on his committee is focused in the area that they're going in and developing the sport in the direction to make it meaningful.
I was once told the best chairman, and you might not agree with this, but the best chairman is not an independent thinker. You fill the room with independent thinkers with great ideas based on their experience.
Absolutely.
Yeah. The chairman is the ringmaster of the circus.
Ringmaster.
100%. And that's why the blend on any committee has got to be a certain way. The danger is you stay in status, you don't move forward, you missing opportunities is the biggest concern I have for any sport, including precision rifle, that we allow something to be considered the norm and we're not seen to develop and progress, because we are being, no one's measuring us, but I see some of the development some of these other countries are making, and it's phenomenal.
Yeah.
And I see some of the industry support at some of these events. And I only hope, and I've had a front row seat of this myself in trying to garner industry support for a group of individuals going to represent the GB. And I only hope that some of the conflicts that are there between shooters who have got their own brand loyalty issues to see the greater good of the whole team succeeding by being able to secure funding that benefits everyone, as opposed to individuals utilising their own existing funding streams, because within every international team is someone that doesn't have any support. It's someone who is a self-funded shooter who's got themselves onto the stage. And I just hope going forwards that the industry gets it, that they need to work together as opposed to compete. Because if you've got an MDT shooter and an XLR shooter going to compete in the world together, there shouldn't be any rub there because one doesn't want the other logo on the shirt and so on and so forth.
Just stopping you there, right? How many logos did you see on Olympic shirts?
None. This is brilliant.
One.
Let's do another podcast for this, because logos on shirts is things that I've had absolute sleepless nights about. And I'm a fan of no logos. but then you want to try and appease some of the manufacturers and sponsors and put some logos on. And then you get people saying, I'm not wearing that if he's doing that and all that sort of stuff. And I've been in a position where I've
Well,
said,
you know what? Hold a second.
Let's have all the logos on. Every logo.
There, right? So
let's charge them nothing.
one of the okay, so there's one main document, right? I've always referred to it as the one single document you can get sued on from an organization perspective, right? And that is your team selection document, right? It is, right? It's the one. It's the contract. Yeah. You basically saying, and every committee, right, should have that team selection document should happen. That should be released the day after each World Championship for the next one, right? Yeah. So it gives you the framework in which you have to qualify. It gives you all of the information that you've got to do these type of competitions. You've got to do maybe you can shoot matches outside of the country, but you've got to come shoot the national championship, or you've got to come shoot 2 matches in the country, or you've got to do this. There's a whole framework that you can build on top of this whole lot, right? And at the end of that document should be, these are the requirements that you're going to have to be able to have on your shirts, right? This is what you're going to be able to do. This is what you can't do. All that stuff done up front, right? Because then there's no argument in the future. Job done.
You agree to do this, and it's on our terms.
Correct.
And interesting. I wrote it down a while. The one thing we've not talked about, which we're not going to talk about, is the Court of Arbitration for Sport. And when we talk about, we're not going down that road.
Next time.
Because people genuinely should be concerned that thing exists.
It does.
Concerned because this isn't a sandpit where we're making up rules as we go along. There are genuine consequences to poorly thought and poorly delivered strategy and policy. And I think sometimes...
Yes.
No, we're not doing it. We're not doing it. I'm just going to touch it and say, we need to understand that the whole sport can unravel if we make decisions that leave us open to criticism and investigation and prosecution by the Court of Arbitration for Sport. I say prosecution, it's not that.
Yeah. So basically, it's the highest authority. That's it.
It is, and it can undermine an entire sport by saying
quite easily,
and we're going to take your train set off you. Yeah. That's one for another one.
Yes, people. Perfect.
Maybe we've been like an hour and 50. It's been the longest one we've done yet. Christian will be gutted because I think we had the longest one was like an hour and 35 minutes.
You know me.
Listening, we'll gather that Rob and I can do this for hours. It's such a fascinating area. It's so important going forward that people out there that enjoy the sport understand the background to it and the foundation to it and the things that we need to focus on as participants, as athletes, as fans of a sport. We need to focus on these things. Otherwise, we're going to miss opportunities. As someone with young kids who my kids are going to shoot precision rifle, I can't wait. As someone who's got kids, I want to see that pipeline, those roads available to them when they get into the sport. Because all I see is other sports with fantastic opportunities, especially a lot of the GB Olympic stuff, taekwondo and stuff like that. Some of the opportunities are out there now for kids based on Olympic pathways that have been set up. And I'm not saying precision rifling in the Olympics, that's not what I'm saying, but bloody hell, the breakdancing in it, so anything's possible.
Yeah.
I just want to see those opportunities available for everyone, not just the person that's got the financial opportunity to get into a sport and compete based on kit, which we do see a lot of. So, mate, it's been...
If I can add one last thing, right?
Well, you have the last bit.
Right. We should all... Each national organization, right? National precision rifle national organization aim to be like Japan at the athletics.
There you go. Let's be like Japan. That's what the t-shirt is.
Let's be like Japan, right? Because they did it. They came from nowhere.
Yeah. I think I saw they were 9 in not the last Olympics before they were 9th in team gymnastics. And they've gone from 9th to first, beating China and America comfortably in the grand scheme of gymnastics in 8 years. Mind blowing.
Yep. And you can do it. It doesn't take... If everybody pulls in the same direction, you will get there.
So we're turning Japanese, to quote a famous song. Mate, it's been absolutely fantastic. I hope people out there, I thank you for anyone that's stood with us for an hour and 45 minutes. Hopefully it's been interesting. Rob, I can't thank you enough for having you on. I've enjoyed it thoroughly, and
Anytime, buddy.
We'll have you on again at some point in the future, I'm sure. Christian always likes to say at the end, all those people out there in podcast land, be good to one another. Thanks everyone for coming.
Good night, everybody.